Well, welcoming on now our good friend Ryan Anderson, Dr. Ryan T. Anderson, famous for his Amazon bannings, author of the book When Harry Became Sally, but also president of the Ethics and Public Policy Center. Ed Whalen, who's a fellow at EPPC, has been writing some really important pieces as well. And we'll link to all those if you come to breakpoint.org. He's been writing some really important pieces on what this unprecedented leak of this early draft of an Alito opinion means. Ryan, we just talked to Erin Hawley from ADF, and we were joking about this looks real. This opinion does not look like a forgery. If it is a forgery, that's pretty impressive, actually, because it's 90-some pages, and it sounds an awful lot like Alito. What's your take on that?
Well, literally minutes ago, was while we were logging in, if you saw me like squinting, I was reading, the court just put out a statement saying that it is an authentic draft. And the Chief Justice put out a statement just saying how damaging this is to the necessary confidential nature of the court's deliberations. I've had friends who have clerked in the Supreme Court more or less every year for the past decade. And, one of them was, best man at my wedding. They will not tell me a thing of what takes place behind closed doors. They take that confidentiality, that vow of secrecy very seriously. And even an off the record, comment of, hey, don't ever repeat this, but just so you know, they don't do it. And so to have someone publicly leak, not just like a vote count, not just an internal deliberation, but the actual draft of an opinion, it's a serious, further erosion of our institutions, right? And so I think a lot about Yuval Levin's work on about how important our institutions are. And the Supreme Court was one of the institutions that still had a pretty good functionality, right? We might always, not always agree with the outcomes, but it actually functioned. And you think about the famous friendship between Ginsburg and Scalia, right? You had people who vehemently disagreed about the law, but were civil, and not only civil, charitable, friendly, and they would never have leaked to undermine each other, right? And so this is, who knows who issued the leak, whether it came from a clerk or one of the justices or from a staff member. Everyone's speculating about that, but the bottom line is that this is not good for the institution. It's not good for the necessary confidentiality for that institution to function well.
Yeah, we had Dr. Levin on several weeks ago on a short course on the loss of trust and specifically dealing with trusted institutions. And that's such an important angle, Ryan. What we've heard leading up to this decision, even from Justice Sotomayor, is that if an overturning of Roe would damage the institution of the Supreme Court, Justice Roberts seems particularly concerned about whether or not the credibility of the court can be salvaged and so on. This draft, and thank you for confirming, I had not heard that the court had actually released a statement. That's an important data point. So here we are. Justice Alito spends an awful lot of time dealing with the stare decisis point, and I talked to Erin about that as well. What do you make of Sotomayor's comment that to overturn Roe would be the thing that damaged the institution, as opposed to a leak like this?
Yeah, no, well, the leak is much more damaging than overturning a wrongly decided decision, because wrongly decided decisions, when they're egregiously wrong, when they're unworkable, when they commit injustice, they should be corrected at the first available opportunity. I think the real tragedy here is that it took 49 years. I think if anything undermined the court's integrity, it was the Casey decision, where you didn't even have a majority of the justices saying, we think Roe was correctly decided, right? If I remember the head counting correctly, it was 2 justices who thought it was correctly decided, 4 who thought it was incorrectly decided, and then the plurality opinion by 3 justices who said, look, we don't think it was rightly decided, but for other reasons, we think we have to uphold the central holding of Roe. And that's where we got the Casey regime. Someone, on Twitter had responded to something I tweeted out, and I had to screenshot 3 pages of the Alito draft opinion. It's a footnote where he just documents case after case after case. And some of these are historic cases where the court had to correct a prior error that it made. It got Roe wrong. It got Casey wrong. Now is the time to finally admit that it got those cases wrong. because it didn't just get cases wrong, right? In getting those cases wrong, it allowed an injustice to take place. It allowed unborn human beings to be denied equal protection of the law. And, when Dobbs is actually decided, publicly, officially decided, if what we see in Alito's draft opinion holds, what that would do is it would then allow us, working through the democratic process at the state level and the federal level, to enact laws that would protect unborn babies, to protect mothers, to pass legislation to assist mothers and families in need. This isn't the end of the pro-life movement. It's the next stage. And to my mind, it's an even more important stage.
Talk a little bit more about that it's a more important stage. And by the way, I share your tension this morning, which is the fact that this is leaked is a big deal. This is a big story. But reading the opinion and thinking, okay, if the final opinion is anything like this is kind of what we hoped for, right? I mean,
yeah, we've been working for it, what we've been praying for. Yeah.
So, I mean, does the opinion, as you understand it, go as far basically as it could have gone in terms of dismantling Roe and Casey and all that?
Yeah, I mean, definitely dismantling Roe and Casey. It went as far as the Solicitor General of Mississippi asked them to do, which was to admit that Roe and Casey were wrongly decided and to return the question to the democratic process. I'm of the opinion that the court could go further. I'm with Robbie George and John Finnis and some other scholars who say that properly understood, the word person in the 14th Amendment includes all human beings, that these were not Peter Singer style, like higher consciousness persons, that the ratifiers of the 14th Amendment, the original public meaning of the 14th Amendment, the word person meant all of us, and that none of us could be denied equal protection of the law or due process of the law. But the court wasn't asked to reach that question, right? So that's why I think none of us were expecting that this court would go any further than this. And so they have done what Mississippi asked them to do, which was to admit Roe and Casey got it wrong. Again, presuming that this draft opinion, something like it, becomes the final opinion. But then the other part of your question was, why is this, this next stage of the pro-life movement a more important stage? Was that, for the first stage, pro-lifers had unanimity in that Roe had to go, right? And there was almost like a singular objective that, we can all agree that the next step is getting rid of Roe, getting rid of Casey. But now the next step, we're going to need to actually have deliberation amongst ourselves. We're going to have charitable disagreement amongst ourselves in terms of, what's the best legislative strategy. Some people are going to be proposing 15-week bills, other people 6-week bills, other people conception bills. And it's going to depend on the jurisdiction, right? What's possible in certain states isn't possible in other states. What's possible at the federal level isn't possible at state level, or what's possible at state levels isn't possible at federal level. And so we're going to actually have to, have some prudential decision making. And then we need to be addressing both the lethal violence in the womb, the abortionists, Planned Parenthood, but also the various social, cultural, and economic factors that leads someone to think they need an abortion. And that's going to be a response both for policymakers and for civil society, both for the law and for the church. There's going to be a lot of work that needs to take place. And that's why I say, to a certain extent, it's a more important phase of the pro-life movement. It's also going to highlight who's pro-life in name only, right? Because having worked now for a decade in DC, a lot of us know who the elected officials are who campaign on being pro-life. And then when they get to DC, they don't want to have to vote on it. They don't want to have to do anything about it. In a post-Roe America, we're really going to see who's willing to expand social capital, political capital, to protect unborn babies, to serve their mothers, to promote family formation, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. And, let's talk also about the reality then that, despite all the references last night, as I was watching the different news programs to The Handmaid's Tale, which I'm so tired of seeing that I could, jump off a bridge. But this is also going to spark California, New York, Michigan, Maryland, other places. And we've already seen not only protections of the rights that Roe v. Wade had codified, but even an expansion. I mean, there's language there that opens up very troubling territory, abortion up till birth, not even clear, at least in the language, about a baby that survives abortion. I don't want to be a conspiracy theorist. I don't know who meant what, but it's not good. What does this look like in terms of on the ground when you have abortion states and life states? What does that look like? Is this a repeat in a sense of slave states and free states? I mean, this is obviously, and you got a book coming out. I want to mention this with Alexandra DeSanctis, who's going to be speaking for us at an event in Michigan in the fall about the book. We're very excited. The timing couldn't be better. About how basically
we wrote it this way.
Yeah, I mean, it's
we worked hard to get the book done in time.
In time for this leak, yeah. Just crazy. But how abortion has poisoned everything. There was a statement this morning. What's it called? The abortion corruption or the abortion exception?
Abortion distortion.
The abortion distortion. It just everything. Confuses everything. And so it's hard to make these historical comparisons, right? I mean, the free states and the slave states, good heavens. I mean, what a chapter in American history. It led to violence. It led to abuse. Is that a bad comparison? How do we think about living in an America where there are not only states where abortion's allowed, but California's talking about flying women to California and paying for their abortion?
Yep. It's not a bad comparison at all, especially because the underlying moral principle is the exact same moral principle. Are we all made in the image and likeness of God? Do we all have intrinsic worth and dignity? Should all of our lives be equally protected under the law? Right? I mean, that's what was at stake with slavery. That's what's at stake with abortion. It's also, I think, a fair analogy in the sense that abortion tourism, as the term is going to be devastating, especially when you're crossing minors, taking minors across state lines. I think even more commonly now is going to be abortion pill. Mail order abortions now account, if I remember correctly, for 56% of all abortions, chemical abortions. You don't even need kind of a doctor's visit for these. That the Biden administration during COVID used COVID as an excuse to remove the doctor exam, which is also going to have implications for sex trafficking. It used to be that one of the ways in which women who were being sex trafficked could kind of get help was when if they were pregnant as a result of the sex trafficking and they had to go to actual doctor's office. But now with abortion pills, the traffickers will have an easier time trafficking women. There's so much more that could be said about the problem with chemical abortion. It's also just like physically unsafe for women, especially when it doesn't go well. Psychologically unsafe when you are actually administering the lethal pill to yourself, and then you see your unborn child exit from your body. But just as a political question, the crisis of the House divided. Can the country stand? I don't see a long-term solution, right? I mean, I do think the country can't be, half pro-abortion, half pro-life. This is also why I think Section 5 of the 14th Amendment is so important. Section 5 explicitly empowers Congress to enact legislation guaranteeing the rights that the first four sections articulate are actually protected. And so the idea here was that after the abolition of slavery, there would be formerly slave states that didn't actually respect the civil liberties and the rights of the newly freed citizens. And so because you couldn't trust the former Confederate states to actually do these things, Congress would have to ensure that no state denied equal protection of the law or the due process of law. I think something similar is going to have to happen at the federal level. And that means elections will matter. Federal elections, the next presidential administration will matter. These upcoming midterm elections will matter. And again, there'll be a lot of work for those of us who are pro-life.
I wonder if Justice Alito, because he did, as Erin Hawley mentioned in the last segment, that he spent a lot of time on the biological difference, or what we know from biology now, and how different that was when Roe was decided. If he's kind of teeing that up, he's saying, look, I can't go that far, but here's what we now know. And is he teeing up this kind of personhood of the preborn?
I mean, I don't want to speculate about what the justice himself thinks on this, apart from what he's written. But I do think, look, there's a role for all of us to be championing the biological facts. Very few people want to say it, are willing publicly, credibly, intellectually, seriously to say it's just a clump of cells, that we don't know when the life of a human being begins. And this is why, intellectually honest supporters of abortion like Peter Singer say, of course it's a human being, but it's not a human person, right? So the first step is going to be, make the biological argument. Second step is make the philosophical argument, the moral argument that all human beings are human persons because we all have a personal nature. We all have a rational nature. We're all made in the image and likeness of God. That's both a philosophical and a theological truth about, the imago Dei, human nature, philosophical anthropology. And some people are willing to accept that, right? That some people are actually like, yeah, the human creature is different than all other life forms. And that then leads like the third argument that they'll make, I'm personally opposed to abortion, but, right? And I saw some of this last night from Catholics on Twitter. It's really, I'm Catholic. It's really distressing when I see Catholics saying, oh yeah, I'm personally pro-life, but I don't want to legislate my morality on others. As if every piece of legislation doesn't embody a certain worldview, a certain morality. Every law we have is enshrining, whether it's about property rights, whether it's about adult homicide, whether it's about child homicide.
Well, Roe legislated morality, and so did Casey, right? Yeah.
And so, they're going to be different stages of pro-choice arguments that we're going to have to respond to, whether they're the biology, whether they're philosophy, whether they're the political theory, whether the constitutional theory. And that's one of the things that, you mentioned the book that Zan and I have coming out in June. Like, we go through all of those sets of arguments, but then building beyond that, abortion has not been good for women. It's not been good for people with disabilities. It's not been good for people on the periphery of life. It's been terrible for our politics. We have a whole chapter on how it's corrupted the courts. If we still had time to make revisions to the book, we could add, another couple of pages about how yesterday's leak has damaged the integrity of the courts. More or less everything abortion has touched, it has harmed. And we can't identify anything that abortion has made better.
And we need to know that because, you could, although I don't think it's a legitimate thing to say, is, 1970s, early 1970s, they're trying to advance healthcare and rights. And, they were wrong, dead wrong and deadly wrong. And we should have known it back then and we didn't. But now we do know, like, the cat's out of the bag. The experiment's been had. We've slid down the slope that we, greased and soaked up. There's, I think your book is so important for that. We ended the last segment with Erin Hawley talking about, look, if this is the decision, then the court has done its job. But the court only did its job because pro-lifers have done their job. And the same thing, state legislatures need to do their job, but we need to do our job. And part of our job is pointing to all these things and saying, look, abortion is not part of a civil society. Abortion is not something that brings flourishing, doesn't bring life. It promises that, but in the words of I forget who said this. It was just a brilliant line. It promised women liberation and it brought them abandonment. That's basically what it's Frederica Matthews Green.
Yes.
And your book really walks through that. Talk. And I know it comes out end of June, right? Is when that release date is. For the book.
Originally, it was when we were expecting the Dobbs decision to come out. Like,
well, hey, my bingo card does not have a Supreme Court leak on it either. So,
no.
Just give us that framework of that book, the title, and everything again, just so people can be expecting it. Because I think it's I don't know anything else like it as you describe it, and we need it in our toolkit.
Sure. I mean, so the title of the book is Tearing Us Apart, How Abortion Harms Everything and Solves Nothing. And the title, all of my books have very explicit titles. The first book I ever did was titled What is Marriage? Man and Woman, a Defense. Like truth in advertising, you know what you're getting. For this one, Tearing Us Apart, in two ways, right? It literally tears unborn babies apart. But then as a culture and as a political community, it's torn us apart, right? Abortion, the past 49 years under Roe v. Wade, did not heal the nation. In Casey, the court said, we're calling on the nation to unify and accept this decision. No, it just further tore us apart, right? So, but then also, subtitle, abortion harms everything it touches. It helps nothing that it touches. The way that we structure the book, the first chapter focuses on the unborn child. Here's the argument of how abortion harms the unborn child. And then we respond to all of the most common arguments you hear from pro-choice activists about why it's not really a child, why it doesn't really have a right to life, et cetera, et cetera. Second chapter is how it harms women. And we look at that both philosophically, how abortion is predicated on the idea that the male body is the norm and that female reproduction and the reality of what my colleague at the Ethics and Public Policy Center, Erica Bacchiacchi, refers to as the asymmetry of reproduction, right? There's an asymmetry with how the male and the female contribute to the reproductive process. Our culture, our economy, our law takes my body as the norm and my wife's body as somehow a defective version of the human body, rather than taking both body types and both roles in the reproductive process seriously, and then crafting public policies, laws, educational programs, economic programs around that reality. But then also there are both physical and psychological harms of abortion to women. So the second chapter focuses on how abortion harms women. Third chapter is focused on how abortion harms the already marginalized populations. Here's where we looked at discriminatory forms of abortion, eugenic forms of abortion. And this goes back to the very founding of Planned Parenthood with Margaret Sanger. We look at how people with disabilities are discriminated against in the womb. We look at how women, baby girls, are discriminated against in the womb. And then when we point out the hypocrisy of the voices that are loudest in condemning discrimination outside of the womb turn a blind eye when discrimination takes place in the womb. And then we also point out some of the racial dynamics of abortion. More Black babies are aborted in New York City than are born. One of the most unsafe places to be a Black American is in the womb. And that's a reality, a sad reality that we need to address. Fourth chapter looks at how abortions undermine medicine. Right? It's harmed the practice of medicine. It's corrupted various professional medical associations where they're just lying about the science, lying about the medicine. But it's also like the practice of medicine. If you're no longer viewing the unborn child as a patient, but as an intruder, as a parasite, if you're not taking healthy female reproduction as a sign of health, but as something that you need to suppress, something that you need to combat, it's corrupted medical practice. That was 4. Chapter 5 looks at the legal system and the courts in particular. Chapter 6 looks at the political process. We used to have 2 pro-life parties. We used to have pro-life Democrats. It's a big political problem that pro-life Americans no longer have a meaningful political choice, right? And our polity would be healthier if neither political party was committed to injustice. And then the last chapter, chapter 7, looks at how it's harmed our popular culture, right? And whether that's big business, whether it's Hollywood, whether it's social media, we just document a variety of ways in which abortion has harmed our culture. And then the conclusion kind of, has just some, the concluding chapter is, thoughts on moving forward. And it's more of an outline in the sense of, we have to address all of these issues. This one book isn't providing all of the answers, but it's kind of like where we open with this next stage of the pro-life movement. We're going to need to be able to think out loud with each other, disagree with each other charitably about what the most kind of prudential, tactical next steps are, with the ultimate goal. Like, this has to be the ultimate goal. Every life is protected in law. It's welcomed in life. And every woman and every family experiencing an unplanned pregnancy or a challenging pregnancy is given the societal support and the political support that they deserve.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, again, to take that comparison forward, at the very best, this decision, if it reflects this opinion, that draft that was leaked, dismantles this kind of fabricated legality of abortion. The goal is that abortion is in the dustbin of history like slavery. It is unthinkable. It is morally reprehensible. It is not an option for us. And that does require, as you have pointed out, that people on the ground continue to be able to make the arguments, continue to be able to love on others, especially women in vulnerable situations with pregnancies, and that we have the social fabric, the local charities, the care, and the public policies that we need. So it sounds, yeah, I mean, this is not a finish line. There's a lot of work ahead, and we'll be looking forward to that book, Ryan, and very excited for it because the timing is great. We need a game plan going forward. What now? And next week in Orlando, Florida, to open up our Wilberforce Weekend special event Thursday night with Erin Hawley, Stephanie Gray Connors, Kristan Hawkins of Students for Life, Jim Daly, and Tim Tebow. And we'll be starting this conversation with that group of people. And man, the timing again. Who knew we were gonna kind of get a glimpse into what's happening? Ryan, thanks so much. Appreciate your work. Where can folks follow you if they want to follow again as you continue to bring some analysis to this whole situation? Where can they find you?
Sure. The Ethics and Public Policy Center is my kind of institutional home. I'm the president there. It's eppc.org. And then on Twitter, that's where you can find kind of all of my Insta analysis. It's at Ryan T. And, RyanTAND. And can I say one last thing? I mean, I want to ask, any of our listeners and viewers, just, pray for the justices. Because I also think one thing we haven't gotten to touch on is that, I think, unfortunately, this leak has elevated the risk that they face just personally for their physical security, for their families. God forbid someone tries to do something to one of the justices between now and when the opinion is finalized to prevent it from being finalized with the right vote count. I've received messages from friends saying that, that's a legitimate concern. And so, we should pray that nothing more happens in a bad direction, that this is where this stops and that there are no aftermaths to this that would be tragic as well.
It's such an important point, and thank you for bringing it up. The history of the pro-life movement started with, a desperation and led to violence from pro-lifers. It would be foolish of us to think that there is not that same sort of passion on the other side. In fact, that's part of what your book talks about. There is that passion. You just had to scroll through Twitter last night, and it was hysterics, absolute hysterics, blatantly false things like, they've just criminalized abortion. None of that's true. But what it really reflects is how deeply ingrained this ethical dilemma has been, and this moral evil. And evil corrupts. This is the point, right? Evil corrupts, and evil that's allowed to hide flourishes even more. And so we're unrooting an evil that has been deeply embedded, deeply flourishing for a long time. It's gonna be. We need to pray for God's grace and protection, including for you, because you're out there, you're out there, on Twitter as well, and that's verbal jousting, but there is enough here to know, gosh, there's a risk. There's certainly a risk for these justices, so we need to be in prayer for them. So thanks, Ryan. Appreciate you, my friend. Good to see you as always.
Yeah, great to see you.